What's up, guys? This is Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, and on this episode, we're going to preview Week 5 in the Premier Lacrosse League. We'll get to some Player Royale, we'll get the picks in the mix in just a little bit, and then we'll round it all out, getting your thoughts heading in to Week 5 here in Minneapolis. So to start out, with Player Royale, again, last week a bit of a tough week. I think a lot of people had a tough week, especially in my challenge pool. Looks like it was just a tough week in general, I think, and especially I think from my attack and midfield. I believe going back to that week got me a combined 1 point in that one. Again, you talk about the struggle that a guy like Schreiber had a couple goals, but also had a handful of turnovers as well. But one positive that I was able to take away from last weekend in Player Royale was jumping back up from 25th in the rankings to 17th overall on the overall leaderboard. So again, a couple tough weekends back to back in Player Royale, but we're still hanging in there pretty solid. So hoping to get a better week this weekend heading into Week 5 in the PLL from my lineup and maybe make a move back towards that top 10 best case scenario, I would say. So my lineup here this weekend for Week 5 at attack, I've got Justin Gutterding at Tier 2. My midfielder is Dane Smith at Tier 1. Defense, I've got Kobe Smith at Tier 3. Face-off is Trevor Baptiste, obviously Tier 1. And my goalie is Jack Kincannon at Tier 2. So to break this down just a little bit, I wanted to go Tier 1 at attack. Originally, I had Will Manny as my attackman this week, as a Tier 1 attackman, but it was hard to pass up on the consistency that you've gotten out of Trevor Baptiste so far in fantasy at face-off, which obviously then takes away one of those Tier 1 options for you. So I went with Tier 2. I went out and got Justin Gutterding as the best available Tier 2 player, averaging about 14.5 points on average in Player Royale. So again, some really good value there as a Tier 2 player, and it also opens up that flexibility of that Tier 1 option in a guy like Baptiste at face-off. My midfielder was Dane Smith. He had 18 points, I believe, in his first game back from the NLL a week ago. Fantasy points, that is 18 fantasy points I'm talking. And the Chaos are in that sort of do or die mode this weekend. They're 0-4. They can't afford to go 0-5 heading into the All-Star breaker. I think that makes their chances of even making the playoffs, let alone defending their title from a year ago, just that much harder after the All-Star break. So I think they have to come out, they have to play well, they have to get a win here this weekend, and that's something we'll talk about throughout this show as well. But I do think that Dane Smith will be a big part of that, where he'll come out and have a big game against a Cannons midfield and really a Cannons defense that's last in scoring defense. My defender is Tier 3 Kobe Smith. I feel like this is actually some pretty solid value here, specifically in this matchup against the Chrome, because as great as a defensive team as I think both these teams are, the Atlas and the Chrome, they being the Chrome, struggle in unsettled situations. They give up a lot of transition opportunities, it seems like, this year. And the Atlas are a team that want to get out and run. A year ago, they led the league in transition opportunities. This year, I believe they're right back up there near the top in transition opportunities. And Kobe Smith already has 2 goals on the year, including a 2-bomb to his credit. So this is one of those matchups where if Kobe can get a ground ball here and there, get down the field in transition and maybe make something happen, there's a lot of value there at a Tier 3 spot. My face-off, as I said, was Trevor Baptiste. This one almost starting to become a bit of a no-brainer, I would say, when looking at some of these tiers, because he leads in face-off wins, face-off percentage, and is second most in ground balls and most points by the face-off position. So again, kind of starting to become a no-brainer Even though originally I was thinking of, like I said before, going with Will Manny as my tier 1 attackman earlier this week, I had Joe Nardella slotted here as my face-off guy against the Water Dogs this weekend in what was my original lineup for week 5. But when you really look at it, as well as Nardella has played this year at the stripe, he's one of the tops in the league in terms of face-off winning percentage and things like that. It somehow hasn't really translated much into fantasy points for him. So that's where you get that difference between he and Baptiste, where Baptiste is going out and getting you 20, 30 points each week, whereas Nardella is getting you 6, 7, 8 points a week. So again, while they're both playing at a pretty high level this year, for whatever reason, it's just not translating to Player Royale for a guy like Nardella the way it is for a guy like Baptiste. So again, sort of a no-brainer, I would say, even going up against a guy like Connor Farrell at the stripe here Friday night in week 5. Just, it's so hard to pick against a guy like Baptiste in the way that he's playing currently to start the year. And then, like I said, my goalie is Jack Kincannon, my other tier 2 guy. The Chrome are second in shots to only the Atlas, second in shooting percentage to the Archers, and they're tied for third in 2-point shooting percentage and third in shots on goal through the first 4 weekends of the regular season. So Kincannon is likely going to see, however the score ends up turning out. I would anticipate it's going to be a relatively moderate score when the final buzzer sounds, but this is a team, the Chrome are a team where Kincannon is going to see his fair share of shots, and it's a matter of, can he continue to the level that he's been on the first 4 weeks of the regular season, being first in save percentage and fourth in total saves, while you remember in week 1 he only played the first half of the game, so he could have and probably would have had a handful more of saves to his credit at this point in the year had he played the full 4 quarters of that week 1 game against the Redwoods. So again, he's going to see his fair share of shots. It's just, can he continue the streak that he's on to start this year? Now, my picks for this week, currently 11-5 if my memory is correct through the first 4 weeks of the regular season in the picks. In terms of the actual picks challenge, now the bets for those games, those bonus picks that I give you guys these last few weeks, that's a bit of a different story, but at least picking the games straight up, I'm 11-5 overall through the first 4 weeks, so doing pretty well with it. Last year, I don't remember that I did all too well with the picks, and it was a challenge as well during the 2020 Championship Series, so good to see that I'm off to a bit of a better start here than in past seasons. But anyway, so the Archers 2-2 and the Redwoods 1-3 to get things started here in week 5. I've got the Archers in this one. The polls as well take the Archers. -175 are the Archers in this one. The bonus pick for this game, I've got Matt Moore under 3.5 points at -120. Then the late game, the late game, if you're in the Eastern time zone as I am, for tonight's game, the Atlas and the Chrome, a 9:45 start time. The Atlas 3-1, the Chrome 4-0. An interesting note here on this game is that the Chrome will be without head coach Tim Sudan for tonight's game due to what the league called medical reasons. Not sure what that is, but in any case, they will be without their head coach for this game tonight. My pick, either way, whether he was there or not in tonight's game, my pick is still going to be the Atlas -130. The polls take the Atlas as well by a surprisingly wide margin at that too. I believe it was about 85% of the poll took Atlas, which I thought, given the fact that the Chrome are 4-0 and the way that they've played to start this season, I thought that it would be much, much closer than that. But I also do, while I will take the Atlas, I do have to like that Chrome at +100, though. I do think that there's some value there, as they're not really much of an underdog in this game. And my bonus pick for this game is Brendan Nickturn under 3.5 points at +105. And then the Chaos and the Cannons, 0-4 Chaos against 1-3 Cannons. My pick here, I've got to go with the Chaos here, minus 125. I really think that the Chaos get a win before the All-Star break. It's something that they need to have happen to even keep their chances of making the playoffs and not being that team on the outside looking in like the Chrome were a year ago. Being on the inside of that playoff picture, like they barely made it a year ago, the Chaos did. I believe they were the 6th seed last year and won the championship. So just not being that last place team and on the outside looking in, a win heading into the All-Star break, I think does a lot for them in terms of looking ahead to the second half of the season and making that push towards the playoffs. So like I said before, it's kind of that do or die situation for them. So I like them to come out firing in this game, knowing that essentially their season could be on the line. And then my bonus pick because of that, for this game, my bonus pick is Josh Byrne over 3.5 points at plus 100. Again, I think they come out firing. I think they're going to be playing as if this is their playoff game because, like I said, you go 0-5 into the All-Star break. The chances that you're making the playoffs are very, very slim unless a team like the Cannons or the Water Dogs, who are just ahead of you at 1-3, unless they completely fall apart the second half of the year. And now that you have your NLL guys back, you start to make that steady move up the standings. I really think that this is a game that the Chaos have to come out and win. And then lastly, the Whipsnakes 4-0 against the Water Dogs 1-3. My pick here is the Whipsnakes minus 160. The polls as well, taking the Whipsnakes. And my bonus pick is Michael Sowers under 3.5 points at plus 115. So coming up in segment 2 on Taking the Field with Stevie Mac to round out the show heading into week 5 in the PLL, we'll get your thoughts in the mix coming up next. All right, welcome back. Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. Final segment of the show here, heading into week 5 in the PLL. Get your thoughts in the mix to round out the show. At Stevie Mac Media is my Twitter handle for all show-related and PLL-related topics and discussion. That's also where you can find the polls each and every week to vote on who you think will win heading into that week's action in the PLL. But from Coach Shrek on Twitter, he says, can the Redwoods bring that same level of effort, intensity, and execution that they brought against the Whips last week against the Archers this weekend? Yeah, this is an interesting game to start out week 5 in the PLL for a couple reasons. When you look at both sides of this matchup, I think for the Redwoods, it's exactly like Shrek says. Can they build off, even in a loss? It was a close loss at that. Obviously, the Whipsnakes are prone to doing that. But the last couple weeks, the Redwoods have finally showed that they have some sort of pulse at both ends of the field. Obviously, they still need to clean some things up, but they got that win a couple weeks ago against the Chaos. They came out, played really hard against a team in the Whipsnakes that I think a lot of people would agree was and is much better in the current situation of things, currently better than this Redwoods team, and they played them all the way through for 4 quarters and really had a chance all the way up until the end. So yeah, even in a loss, can they continue building off these last few games and showing that they still have the ability to compete at a high level? And eventually you have to believe that the wins will start to come for this Redwoods team. And on the flip side of that, the Archers, you have to imagine that, especially on the offensive side of things, they're going to be frustrated by the loss a week ago to the Atlas, that extremely low scoring game, which I don't think any of us really predicted heading into that game. I think a lot of people had the over in that one, and it didn't really even come close to that. So again, just the frustration that I think that offense had a week ago with trying to handle the Atlas defense. You talk about a guy like Schreiber, I believe I read somewhere, had about 5 turnovers in that game. And really at one point during the broadcast, you remember back to that game, they even said, yeah, it's actually incredible that we've hardly called Schreiber's name, we've hardly called Will Manny's name, Marcus Holman, etc., etc. Like, those are the guys that they lean on to be the driving forces of that offense, and you really barely even noticed them in that game a week ago. So I do expect the Archers will come out this weekend, and against a Redwoods defense that's still trying to get their footing a little bit. They're not one of the better teams in terms of scoring defense so far this season in the PLL. So expect the Archers to come out and just start firing the ball all over the place, just trying to put some shots past Tim Troutner in the cage and just try and get some of that mojo back. He says, can the Chrome learn to get off to a fast running start and not rely on late game heroics? Yeah, that was easily one of the more exciting games, I'd say, right up there with the Redwoods Whipsnakes and the Atlas Archer games last weekend. That was one of the more exciting games of the weekend because of that late game comeback that the Chrome were able to put on, really quarterbacked by the play of Brendan Nickturn as well in that one. But yeah, can they get off to a fast start? Because the Atlas are not a team, unlike the Cannons, where you can get off to a slow start and expect to just claw your way back in. If you give them a 3-4 goal lead, especially going into halftime, that's very dangerous considering what we know Trevor Baptiste can do and the level of play that we know a guy like Jack Kincannon is on to start this year. It's not easy to score against this Atlas defense. It's not easy to score against Jack Kincannon right now. And again, with what we know Baptiste is able to do, going 70-80% on any given weekend, if you go down 3-4 goals at half, it's just going to make that second half that much harder for you. He says, if the Chaos lose this game, is it time to hit the panic button for them? I want to lean towards yes on this one because, like I said before, this is a game where you have to just find a way to get one in the win column if you're the Chaos and not go into the All-Star break 0-5. If I'm Andy Towers in this team, I'm absolutely treating this game this weekend as a playoff game and saying this is it. This is our one chance. If we don't win this game, the second half of the season is going to be as much of an uphill climb as you can possibly imagine for them to just make it out of that last place spot and make it into the postseason here in 2022. So yeah, absolutely. I think if they lose this game, I don't want to say that their season is necessarily over, but I also wouldn't necessarily expect them to make this huge leap the second half of the season either. He says, with healthy Zach Tucci in the lineup for the Water Dogs to take faceoffs, if the Water Dogs get out to an early lead, can they maintain the lead with Zach Currier now getting to play his game of playing both offense, defense, and wing play? Yeah, Currier has been off to a bit of a slow start, I think, in terms of production this year. You normally see him, he'll have 2-3 goals a game, 2 assists a game, some ground balls, some caused turnovers. Like, he's one of those guys that can do just about everything for your lacrosse team. And then add to the fact that a few weeks ago, he was even taking face-offs for this team as well. I mean, like, there's not a whole lot more that you can ask a guy like Currier to do for your lacrosse team, which is what they've done here the last few weeks because of some of those injuries at the face-off with guys like Tucci and Jake Withers as well. So with Tucci being back healthy, that hopefully moves, like Shrek is saying, hopefully moves a guy like Currier more to his natural position and what he's used to doing, playing off that wing, being a guy that can get up and down the field and be productive at both ends of the field, and just being a more productive part to this Water Dogs team going forward. Then from Michael Grine, he says, Archers Woods, it's time for Archers to show they are legit. Woods have to show some fight, and they are in trouble if they lose. Yeah, I think the Archers, and I said this on, I believe it was Tuesday's show that we did, I said that the Archers have always kind of been that team where they have the kind of talent on their roster to be a top 3 team in the PLL, but they've always kind of hovered around that 4 through 6 range, I think. And this is one of those games where you have to come back after that loss to the Atlas, and I almost want to say pour it on the Redwoods, right? Like you saw a couple weeks ago, their offense kind of poured it on the Cannons. I think that's almost what they have to do here in this game. And eventually they do have to show that they are one of those top 3 teams in the PLL. I know they're currently ranked, I believe it's 4th in the PLL standings, but like I said on Tuesday's show, they've always kind of hovered around that 500 mark, where they're currently, or like they're usually sitting in that 4 through 6 range in the standings, but you always get the sense that their roster is much better than what their record always indicates. He says, can the Chrome learn to get... Oh, excuse me, that's Shrek's comment from before. He says, Atlas Chrome, potential semifinal championship preview. I am a big Chrome guy, but I think Baptiste gives the Atlas the edge. Will be a great game. Yeah, like I said, this will probably be one of the more interesting games of the weekend, because these teams are both obviously very good offensively. They're 2 of the top scoring offenses in the league, but they're also 2 of the top scoring defenses in the league. So it's really just which end of the field wins out in this game. But I think either way it goes, it's going to be an absolutely electric game nonetheless. And yeah, I think it could potentially be, like he says, a semifinal or championship game preview. That's something that people thought a couple weeks ago could have been the case between the Atlas and the Whip Snakes as well. But yeah, I would think that this is at worst a potential semifinal matchup between the Atlas and the Chrome. He says, Chaos Cannons. I like the Cannons here after their game against Chrome, although I know Andy... Yeah, he says Cannons here after their game against the Chrome, although I know Andy Towers will have the Chaos ready. If the Chaos lose this one, I think they finish in last place. If they win, things get very interesting in the fight for the last playoff spot. And yeah, that's something that we've talked about time and time again throughout this episode, is that I like the Chaos here because of that sense of urgency that they're going to have to play with, essentially making this game a playoff game. Because you talk about the 2 teams ahead of them in the standings currently, one of them is the Cannons, so the winner of this game potentially finds themselves at the end of the year in the playoffs, and the other one finds themselves out of the playoffs, which essentially, like I said, makes this game almost a de facto playoff game. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that one plays out. And then he says, Whips, Water Dogs, it's tough to beat a team twice in a short time frame, and that's what the Whips are trying to do here. I like the Water Dogs in this one, coming off their best performance of the year last week, although if it's close, never count the Whips out. Yeah, that's absolutely something that we've come to learn is basically a given almost at this point, is that if it's a close game in the final 2 minutes of regulation or the game goes into overtime, you almost have to bet on the Whip Snakes finding a way to somehow pull that game out. Even if it's not necessarily a game that you feel like they deserve to win, they always just seem to find a way to do so. And yeah, it's like he says, it's tough to beat a team twice in a short amount of time. You see it all the time in sports. A team will take, let's say, the 2 regular season meetings, then they meet in the postseason, and then they lose that third time around. It's just so hard because, again, in any sport, when you play a team multiple times in a given year, you start to get that familiarity with them. You start to understand their tendency. You have more film that you can watch on them and things like that. So you start to understand the matchup a little bit better. And then eventually you do sort of have that chance where you can finally flip the script and win one of those games. So yeah, it is very hard to beat a team multiple times in the same year, no matter what sport it is. But if there was a team that was able to do it, I feel like the Whip Snakes would be one of those teams. The Atlas, you even saw it a year ago, beat the Cannons 3 times in 1 year, beating them twice in the regular season and then again in the playoffs. So the Whip Snakes, the Atlas are probably 2 of those teams that I think could do it. The Chrome, this year's version of the Chrome, I think are also a team that's built to beat the same team multiple times in one season if they need to do so, especially looking ahead towards the postseason. But that'll do it for this episode of Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this post. You can also find the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, including Google, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Stitcher, just to name a few. But that'll do it for me. I'll talk to you guys later.